Good evening, everyone. Yeah, good evening. So today's topic is very important, environment section, COP28. Recently it was concluded, so we wanted to cover its outcome. In 2021 and 22 mains, what they have done, they have asked questions from the outcome of these COPs. Right, and at the same time it is very important for prelims also. Several initiatives are launched by different countries, group of countries on the sidelines of this conference of party. So in this booklet we have added and mentioned many of these initiatives also, outcome and all these things, and how India is also playing a leading role. There can be a separate question on this. Okay, so what we will discuss in this lecture, let me give you the agenda. Outcome of Conference of Party 28. Where it happened? Dubai, UAE. Right. So we know that context is there. Recently concluded summit. Thereafter we will see the outcome straight away. Important and major outcome. Thereafter we will see India's role, initiatives at COP28. Thereafter we will talk about the analysis aspect. Analysis in terms of positives, limitations. Thereafter we will talk about way forward. So the basics, we know that COP or Conference of Party, it is of UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This was outcome along with other two United Nations Framework Conventions or major conventions like UNCBD, Convention on Biodiversity, and Convention on Combating Desertification, UNCCD. These three sister agreements, we call them, or conventions, they were the outcome of Earth Summit 1992. Right. As the name suggests, Framework Convention on Climate Change. So it is talking about the climate change. These are related to the intergovernmental negotiations on the climate change actions. COP. Every year, generally, these people, leaders, let's say leaders of the members who have signed this UNFCCC, they meet in November or December month, around the November and December month in different parts of the country. Okay, so this year in Dubai. Right. So let's try to understand the outcome aspect. When we talk about the climate change negotiations, let me tell you a few things here. The basics, we know that climate change or global warming, the greenhouse gases emissions from the fossil fuel burning and other sources, be it methane source emissions, and we can say from the agriculture, or we can say that the cattle also, or the waste generation. So there are different sources of greenhouse gases. It is important for prelims examination. We should be prepared with this. And the climate change actions and negotiations revolve around how to reduce these greenhouse gas emissions, how to have the transition towards the clean energy sources, and along with that, it also talks about providing the financial support and the technological transfers from developed countries to developing and underdeveloped countries. Because there is one principle which is at the center stage or core of these negotiations, and that is called as CBDR, common but differentiated responsibilities. Okay, common but differentiated responsibilities, CBR, and individual capacities, IC. Okay, so what does it mean? It says that climate change actions is the responsibility of all, because everyone is contributing to climate change. But we have to understand that this responsibility is different for different countries. Why? Because the developed countries, they have been responsible for this contribution towards the climate change largely for last 200 years. And the developing countries or underdeveloped countries are in recent times, they are, we can say, somehow contributing to the global warming or climate change. So more responsibility lies with developed countries. Second thing is that due to this historical contribution, at the same time, these developed countries are having sufficient resources, finance and the technology to, we can say, tackle the negative effects of this global climate. Climate change. And because of that, they should share that technology. They should share the funds, resources with the developing and underdeveloped countries so that they can also contribute towards the climate change actions. So if suppose tomorrow there is question in mains regarding the basics of this climate change negotiations and CBDR principle, you should be able to touch these different dimensions. ठीक है, ये प्रिंसिपल जो है CBDR principles. Now, as the members of UNFCCC, all these countries, developed country, developing countries, underdeveloped, least developed countries or small island nations, so their leaders come together and they have their different, we can say, viewpoints, interest on these negotiations. And through these negotiations, there can be, let's say, a common agreement. So in past, we have seen that Kyoto Protocol. So COP3 resulted into Kyoto Protocol in 1997, and that was a binding agreement, legally binding agreement for, we can say, a reduction of greenhouse gases. Similarly, the common ground was achieved in Cop21 Paris Agreement 2015. ठीक है, 2015 में हमने एक common ground फिर से, but the major change that happened is it is not legally binding as such, or we can say there were no let's say time limits, or we can say that how much greenhouse gases are to be reduced by the developing countries. So those specific targets were not given like Kyoto Protocol. Already in mains examination last year, not 23, 22, they asked about Kyoto Protocol. So students were actually caught off guard that 1997 wala question, how they are asking now, right? Or the Gothenburg, we can say, convention or protocol, Gothenburg Protocol related to mercury pollution. So they are asking those protocols. That means in mains examination, it's not that only they will ask the most recent one like Glasgow Summit or Paris Summit. Rather, they will ask about the past also. And COP negotiations have evolved. Every year something new has come up. And this year also, if we talk about the outcome, you have received the booklets, all of you? Let's directly see on the booklet, because many new initiatives have been announced and the progress we should see in under subheadings, different subheadings. Now, for the first time, so Paris Summit 2000, Paris Agreement, we can say, 2015 had the provision related to global stocktake. Okay, global stocktake was something, we can say that a kind of accountability mechanism. Rather, I would say only accountability mechanism that was mentioned in the Paris Agreement. And this global stocktake is related to a follow-up on implementation of the commitments that have been done, INDCs or NDCs. Okay, so nationally determined contributions. So whatever the voluntary contributions the countries were announcing, whether they have implemented that, how much successful such implementation have, where they are lagging, how much they are lagging, all these let's say compiled in one particular report. For the first time, this was published as a synthesis report, first global stocktake during this summit. Okay, so major we can say that outcome is this one, and this particular report suggests that world's overall progress in climate resilience and underscored need of immediate, concerted and strengthened collective action towards faster adaptation and mitigation measures. That means world is far lagging behind what it has promised. तो ऐसा आप लिख सकते हैं आंसर में, right? So to support the first global stocktake, let's say report or the findings, there has been one proposal by high level champions and the Marrakesh partnership. Okay, this is the expert body on climate change action, voluntary, let's say body, we can say non-profit kind of thing, have compiled 2030 climate solutions and implementation roadmap. So they are proposing some solutions also. Some countries may get some ideas to implement them. Okay. So depending on the data from this global stocktake, such kind of research can happen at international level and the solutions can be proposed by the expertise. Now the second important part,
the Marrakesh partnership, their solution is based on the report or based on some other?
No, it is based on the we can say that the findings of report.
Based on this global stock.
Yes. So because some countries are, we can say, achieving, like for India, let's take an example of India. India has largely achieved its NDCs. Okay, it's on the path to achieve NDCs largely, but the many other countries, they are lagging behind. Now, loss and damage fund, we know that last year COP27 in Egypt, this loss and damage fund was announced, the major outcome last year COP27. But it was decided that the nitty-gritties of loss and damage fund, that how, let's say, countries will fund this, how it will be implemented, where its, let's say, headquarter will be, let's say, set up, all these things were to be decided by a committee. And now there is agreement on this fund. Okay, so many countries have contributed to this voluntarily. There is historic agreement on the operationalization of loss and damage fund funding arrangement, and World Bank has been chosen as an interim trustee and host for next 4 years. Interim trustee. Okay, so World Bank, this can be asked in the prelims examination. For 4 years, many countries like Netherlands, Slovenia, France, Italy, Spain, they have committed significantly to this loss and damage fund. Now, loss and damage fund is very important for which kind of countries?
Developing and underdeveloped.
Yes, developing, underdeveloped countries, especially small island nations, least developed countries, small island nations. And the loss and damage aspect is related to the kind of loss of livelihood is there, loss of lives, loss of, we can say that the agricultural land, the cultivable land, because of different kinds of impact of climate change phenomena in these countries. So let's take example of, let's say, island nation. So if suppose island nation is there, because of sea level rise, what will happen? The amount of area of that island will be reducing, the habitable area. So what will happen because of that? So the land is less available for the people. The people may face, let's say, lack of livelihood opportunities also, because of there may be, let's say, lack of groundwater availability, because groundwater, let's say, saline water incursions in the groundwater. बहुत सारी चीजें आती है. So there is loss. And there is a damage because of these things. And these countries are not, let's say, responsible for it. Other countries are responsible for it. So that's why the other countries should compensate. It is a kind of compensation, loss and damage. Okay, it's not for like the finance transfer for mitigation or adaptation. It's simply the loss and damage. The new aspect has been adopted in recent negotiations, we can say. Now, this is unique. Adoption of Santiago network draft framework. Santiago network draft. Now, this Santiago network has been, let's say, announced as a network of the service providers. Okay, this network established in 2019 at COP25. This connect providers of technical assistance, technical services, And this connects civil society, non-governmental organizations, private sector with those that need it most. Generally the governments. Okay, on behalf of people. So this is good thing because they are providing technical assistance to deal with let's say kind of mitigation and adaptation needs that are required, and let's say this can be asked in the prelims examination. Its headquarter will be, or office will be hosted by United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction and United Nations Office for Project Services. This will host the Santiago Network Secretariat. Okay? So this can be asked in the prelims examination. Now, C4 cities initiative. What is this? C4 cities. This initiative is very important. Basically, this is the mayors of different cities around the world, major cities, leading cities around the world. They have committed towards the climate actions. Okay. So it is C40 cities, we can say. C40 cities. It will receive €1 million, 1 million euros from Scotland's Climate Justice Fund. Climate Justice Fund of Scotland. So this funding will go towards tackling loss and damage in marginalized communities, especially targeting sub-Saharan Africa. Now this is very specific. One particular country is contributing to that initiative.
So it's only for sub-Saharan countries.
Especially targeting sub-Saharan countries. But cities only, because C40 is related to cities. It is working on reducing the impact of climate change in cities. Okay, so this thing you should know. So this was about loss and damage. Now let's talk about the climate finance. What initiatives were launched? Now we know that there has been the new phenomenon or new mechanism that is being negotiated as a part of financial transfers or climate finance. Why? Because in past, whatever the decisions were taken, be it we can say that Green Climate Fund is there or related to global environment facility is there, all these have not been successful. This is GCF का $100 billion का जो target था per year, that has not been achieved. So it has been felt that the new things are required, new negotiations are required for the climate finance, we can say. Just a moment. It's working. What is it? Right, yes. So the new financial mechanism was required. Some kind of new obligations were required, and that's why this is called as the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. It is called new collective quantified goal on climate finance. Okay, so there are some negotiations going on under this, but there is no significant outcome of this. There are parallel outcomes, like for example, adaptation fund that is already existing under COP. ठीक है, past में launch किया गया हुआ है. So new contributions came to this adaptation fund, totaling to 187.7 million. So this is good thing. Then Green Climate Fund, the fund has received a boost to its second replenishment with announcement of 6 new pledges. Developed countries ने दिया है थोड़ा बहुत देना भी पड़ेगा ना, otherwise they will not be happy. It's like a kind of bargain thing. Okay, and the developed countries have to let's say pledge some kind of finance, otherwise there will be rift, and that is not good for whatever the progress we have made till the date. Okay. Then it has also, let's say, announced least developed countries fund and special climate change fund. Okay. New commitments to these funds, let's say related to mitigation and adaptation needs.
It's a commitment only, sir, not yet to be developed.
New commitments in terms of funds.
Yes,
okay.
The fund have not yet to be developed. It's not developed so far. or they are already
These least developed countries fund and special climate change fund has been already set up. It's not announced in this. Okay. Now UAE climate investment fund, this is new one. This is new one and this is by UAE. It is led by UAE. Okay, and this has target to attract 250 billion investment by the end of this decade. Okay, it has specifically, let's say, given $5 billion to incentivize investment flows into global south, largely the developing and underdeveloped countries. Global south means. Okay, now this one, new global capacity building coalition is announced, supported by Bloomberg Philanthropies. This will bring together some of the world's leading climate finance organizations and the philanthropists, okay, and the private sector, we can say, to enhance the capacity building of underdeveloped and least developed countries. So why it is required capacity building from financial institutions in emerging developed countries to meet the aims of UN and G20 sustainable finance? See, what these financial institutions are concerned, they are concerned that we will provide you finance, but are you using that funds in a efficient manner, or are you wasting them? Are you using them for intended purpose? Do you have capacity to use them effectively, efficiently? If you don't, then how we will provide you funds? This is the concern. And that's why what they are feeling is, they are feeling that these countries, emerging and developing countries, they need to have some kind of capacity building first. Then the funds will be used in an efficient manner. This coalition will work towards that. Also, World Bank has pledged that it will devote 45% of its annual financing to climate-related projects by 2025. All these are climate finance-related announcement. But as an outcome of UNFCCC, the new finance deal has not been announced. Okay. Now, the methane has been at the center stage in recent times. Like last year, global methane pledge was announced. This year also, on the sidelines of we can say this summit, there are several, let's say, initiatives launched. We know that methane is more potent greenhouse gas than the CO2, about 30 times potent. At the same time, second largest contributor to the present day global warming. Okay. Now we know that for methane sources, there are natural sources for methane. We know that natural sources like volcanic eruption, wetlands, ठीक है, या फिर जो ruminating animals होता है, हाँ, ruminating animals, that is a natural thing, we can say, sources. And let's say anthropogenic sources, you can mention paddy cultivation, rice cultivation, we can say. Then we can also say that wastelands, dumping yards, wastelands, dump yards, right? Then what we can say for methane, largely these two are there. Then we can say that the ruminating animals, cattle. So when done on commercial basis, it is kind of anthropogenic only.
Now the government is also promoting the methane gas for the cooking purpose and everything.
But that is burnt, no, it is not released in the atmosphere. Okay.
So if it burns, it won't really...
Not a problem, it is cleanly burning. Okay. CO2 is released ultimately, but we can say it is clean. Right. Now, low methane initiative, prelims examination. What is full form of low? Lowering organic waste methane. Lowering organic waste methane. So organic waste is one of the source, we can say, for methane emissions, and this has been launched by a coalition of international partners during COP28. The initiative aims to achieve at least 1 million metric tons of annual waste sector methane reductions by 2030. And to accomplish this, it will collaborate with 40 sub-national jurisdictions and their national governments with an aim to unlock. These facts are not important. Lowering organic waste, इतना याद रखना है उसका full form. Then there is Dairy Methane Alliance launched by 6 world's largest food companies like Nestle is there or Kraft Heinz. For the first time, the private sector in dairy, private companies from the dairy sector has come forward to reduce the methane emissions. Till the date, only the governments came forward in the form of global methane pledge. Okay. So for the first time, the private companies from the dairy sector, they have come forward to launch this one. Okay. Now, phasing down of fossil fuels. Yes. So the negotiations are targeted towards that also. We need to have just transition towards the more clean fuels. So phasing down of the polluting fossil fuels. Countries like Switzerland, EU demanded phase out of oil and gas by 2050 and coal by 2040. But the final draft removed this and said that the word will be phasing down, not phase out. Last year also we have seen such kind of controversy. At last moment India forced the grouping to change the wording. एक दिन का extension भी लिया हुआ था negotiations में. रात भर बैठे थे negotiate कर रहे थे. Right. So this was the situation, and this year also that continued. So we should understand that why it is important. Okay, the term phasing down and phase out. The phase out is a kind of extreme term, and phasing out the fossil fuels is not at all the solution for developing and underdeveloped countries. Developing countries like India, China, Brazil, South Africa, they are at present focused more on economic growth. Why? Because they have more population, and improving standard of life of these people is the priority, first priority as compared to the climate actions. They feel that the standard of life of people living in the developed countries, it is because of the economic growth of those countries, and economic growth of those countries was based on the burning of fossil fuels. So it will be unjust for them. Okay. Suddenly phasing out. So these countries will be, or we can say, brought together only when there is some kind of a small nudge or the mild language is used, like phasing down. So it shows that yes, all countries agrees to reduce the consumption of fossil fuels. Okay. Now, yes, so in the final draft of the outcomes of UNFCCC, they have emphasized on the role of carbon removal technologies. Carbon removal technologies, simply we can say that CCUS technologies, or let's say carbon sinks and all these things. Okay, carbon sequestration, we can say. Carbon capture and let's say utilization and storage. So direct air capture. CCUS, one of the technology, direct air capture, enhanced rock withering, this is also one of the method. Marine cloud brightening, what is this? Marine cloud brightening can be asked in the prelims examination. Marine cloud brightening is simply, we can say that, spraying the sea water on the sea with cannons. What will happen because of this? Sea water is having salt. Okay, when the water is sprayed with cannons, it will be spread in the droplets, and droplets will be ultimately evaporated, leaving behind the salt particles in the air. These salt particles in the air will act as hygroscopic nuclei for further formation of clouds, condensation, and we can say these clouds having the white surface will be able to reflect more and more incoming solar radiation, because the clouds have white surface and they have more albedo. proportion of heat that is reflected or incoming solar radiation that is reflected, right? And that's why this method will be successful. Seawater is having that salt particles which will be acting as a hygroscopic nuclei.
How come that will reduce the carbon?
No, it will not reduce the carbon.
Okay.
Rather, it will help in global cooling. It is not reducing the carbon from the atmosphere.
It's coming under this carbon removal technology.
Yes, we can say that this is different technology related to dealing with global warming. Okay. Direct air capture is one of the, we can say, carbon removal technology. Okay. Okay, now there is global cooling pledge which India, China did not sign. Okay. Global cooling pledge is related to the cooling appliances, cooling sector. 66 national governments, they have announced and pledged that they will reduce the climate change happening because of cooling related emissions. Okay. Cooling related emissions across all sectors by at least 68% globally relative to 2022 levels by 2050. ये prelims में आपको पूछा जा सकता है fact. 68%. Okay. But India did not sign this. We know that, of course, इंडिया में अभी तो शुरू हुआ है अर्बन एरियाज में कूलिंग एंड ऑल दिस थिंग्स, यूज ऑफ रेफ्रिजरेटर्स, एसीज एंड ऑल, ठीक है, तो उससे रिलेटेड हम इजीली नहीं कर सकते हैं. एंड यस, ऑफ कोर्स इंडस्ट्रीज आर मच डिपेंडेंट ऑन दिस. Climate Club, currently comprising 37 members and growing, the Climate Club was launched at Cop28, is a leading high ambition intergovernmental forum. Okay, and it is hosted by OECD in tandem with IEA, International Energy Agency. Its secretariat will be hosted by these two.
It's on the sideline of this COP.
Yes, sidelines. All these announcements are on the sidelines of this COP. ठीक है? Climate Club Forum. Okay. Now there is new announcement related to nuclear energy also. See, methane is there. Then we can say that renewable energy, tripling of renewable energy will be there. Nuclear energy is there. So these are some other areas where these countries are coming together. If not the CO2 emissions reduction. ठीक है, तो सारे कंट्रीज का ये एक इश्यू है ना कि फॉसिल फ्यूल्स नहीं कम कर सकता है, तो लेट्स से रिड्यूस द अदर एस्पेक्ट्स आल्सो. सो न्यूक्लियर एनर्जी इज वन ऑफ द क्लीन एनर्जी. ठीक है, न्यूक्लियर एनर्जी इज वन ऑफ द क्लीन एनर्जी एंड यस, it recognized, COP28 recognized as a potential solution for clean energy. So more than 20 countries including US, Canada, UK, France pledged to triple the nuclear power capacity by 2050 from the 2020 levels. ठीक है, triple nuclear energy. Right. Now, renewed thrust on renewable energy and decarbonization. There is new pledge, Global Renewables and Energy Efficiency Pledge. Global Renewables and Energy Efficiency Pledge. We have not signed this one also. Okay, India has not signed this pledge also. What it is saying, limiting the warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It requires deep, rapid and sustained reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions of 43% by 2030 and 60% by 2035 relative to 2019 levels. Hence, the official goal of tripling the renewable energy capacity globally to at least 11,000 gigawatt and doubling the global average annual rate of energy efficiency improvement by 2030 was endorsed by about 130 countries, including European Union. Okay, including European Union. Now, one more related to utilities for zero alliance. Utilities for zero alliance. So International Renewable Energy Agency, जिसको हम बोलते हैं, high level champions have united about 25 global utilities and power companies. ठीक है, it is related to power utilities. ठीक है, the electricity producing companies around the world, power companies, for joint commitment to advance electrification, renewable energy grids and clean energy deployment in line with the goals of 2030 breakthroughs.
So it's just like the
Alliance.
dairy company, private company, like this power company also.
Yes, like dairy companies, they are let's say trying to reduce the methane emissions. So these utilities will try to reduce the emissions from the energy sector, power sector, we can say. Now, this is the new area that UNFCCC negotiations are venturing, and this is related to food security and climate smart agriculture. Food security and climate smart agriculture. So this is called as UAE Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Resilient Food Systems and Climate Action. So about 153 national governments, including European Union signatories, committed to scaling up adaptation and resilience of agri-food systems to reduce the vulnerability of farmers and the food producers impacted by climate change. ठीक है, तो food security से related है. To support this much needed transition, UNFAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, presented its global roadmap regarding the same. Now, similar to that, sectoral transitions like cement sector, जैसे dairy sector is there, power sector is there, cement sector companies, they have also come forward. Cement and concrete breakthrough. It is launched by Canada and UAE. ठीक है, it is launched by Canada and UAE. This initiative aims to scale up decarbonization of highly polluting cement industry by sharing best practices, innovative, let's say practices like carbon capture and storage utilization or circular economy. ठीक है. Then there is one more. Global Decarbonization Accelerator. Global Decarbonization. It is a comprehensive action plan spearheading decarbonization efforts of industries, energy and transport sector by facilitating key enablers like policy making, financing. It envisions the participation of country representatives, international organizations and companies also, especially to support global south countries. Global Decarbonization Accelerator. Okay. Now, Africa Green Industrialization Initiative. Africa Green Industrialization Initiative. This initiative is by Kenya. Okay, it is launched as a private sector driven initiative for African nations.
Another private sector.
Huh?
Another private sector.
Yes, for private sector driven initiative. ठीक है, African nations. Then decarbonization of global trade. ठीक है, बहुत ज्यादा हो जाएगा ये, इतना इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं है. हेल्थ एंड क्लाइमेट चेंज. हेल्थ से रिलेटेड क्या है? यूएई डिक्लेरेशन ऑन क्लाइमेट एंड हेल्थ. 141 गवर्नमेंट ज्वाइंड दिस डिक्लेरेशन which commits to advance climate resilient development and strengthening of health systems. ठीक है, inclusive climate policies, gender responsive and just transitions and climate action partnership. So many things are there. So it is basically further working on Lima work program on gender and its gender action plan. This was outcome of 2014 COP. Lima. ठीक है, 2014 COP. ठीक है, so all these are the prominent ones. Remember the major ones, especially for prelims. You should be knowing the important ones. Now, India's leadership and engagement. India's leadership and engagement. The most important part was the announcement of Global Green Credit Initiative. So, this is Green Credit Initiative of India, and our Prime Minister had announced on this platform and requested, appealed all the countries to join this. This is voluntary. credit, we can say carbon credit mechanism. अब तक जो भी था that was a kind of legal, or we can say that kind of mandated carbon credits aspect, like the three or carbon market mechanisms of Kyoto Protocol. But this one is voluntary. Okay, so urge the global community to join India's green credit initiative, conceptualized as a mechanism to incentivize voluntary pro-planet actions. Voluntary like for example, let's say I have 1 acre of land and I am voluntarily planting the trees. Okay, I am voluntarily planting the trees there. Now this is contributing to the global climate change action, planting of trees. That is contributing to reducing the CO2 amount. One such example I am saying. There can be many such initiatives by the voluntary sector, we can say, or group of people also, the alliances also, or at local government also. ये उससे related है, ठीक है? Now, second is Global River Cities Alliance. This is also unique. You should know that in India we have River Cities Alliance. Okay, in India we have River Cities Alliance. This River Cities Alliance is by Ministry of Jal Shakti and Ministry of Urban and Housing Ministry. ठीक है, ये जो River Cities Alliance जो है इंडिया में Ministry of Jal Shakti, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Ministry of Housing Urban Affairs. Now we have requested the world to join this global River Cities Alliance, and we have signed the memorandum of understanding with we can say Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. On the behalf of River Cities Alliance, National Mission for Clean Ganga has signed this memorandum. This can be asked in the prelims examination. Very important. Okay, River Cities Alliance is related to reducing the impact of climate change by these cities located on the bank of rivers, sustainable use of waters of those rivers, and reducing the pollution of these rivers. ये सारी चीजें उसमें होती है, ठीक है? Now, next one is phase 2 of LEADS program. Lead it. What is Lead it program? लीड इंडस्ट्रियल ट्रांजिशन, ठीक है? इंडस्ट्रियल ट्रांजिशन से रिलेटेड ये प्रोग्राम है और इनिशिएटिव है, हम बोल सकते हैं. दिस द सेकंड फेज ऑफ दैट हैज बीन लॉन्च, co-launched by India and Sweden. Okay, lead industrial transition, and it will focus on inclusion, just industry transition, co-development, transfer of low carbon technology, financial support to emerging economies for industry transition. It will connect governments, industries, technology providers, research and think tanks of the two countries to facilitate green industrial and economic growth. It was first launched, कहाँ पे लॉन्च किया गया था? ये दो कंट्रीज ने, इंडिया एंड स्वीडन ने ही लॉन्च किया है एट यूएन क्लाइमेट एक्शन समिट न्यूयॉर्क 2019. दिस कैन बी आल्सो आस्क्ड इन द प्रीलिम्स एग्जामिनेशन. सो इंडियाज कंट्रीब्यूशन एंड लीड कैन से लीडरशिप इन दिस पर्टिकुलर प्लेटफॉर्म, ये 2-3 चीजें आप बता सकते हैं. नाउ द पॉजिटिव्स एंड नेगेटिव्स. पॉजिटिव्स एज सच मेजर इतना कुछ नहीं है अगर देखा जाए तो, कंसिडर टू द ग्लासगो समिट एंड द पेरिस समिट. ओके, सो वी कैन से दैट द मेजर आउटकम इज लॉस एंड डैमेज फंड, ऑपरेशनलाइजेशन ऑफ दिस फंड, because last year it was announced and there was concern that when it will be operationalized, how the nitty-gritties will be worked out, and immediately within 1 year all countries agreed on its operationalization. ठीक है, so this is good thing and many countries have also committed the funds. Now the second aspect is beginning of the end of fossil fuel era. Yes, every year there will be pressure on, we can say, ending the fossil fuels. So somehow at some time period or in the few years later, there will be change in the wording of this let's say COP summit declaration. ठीक है, so And of course, all these countries are committing or committed towards reducing the use of fossil fuels. So we can say that there will be peak 25 to 30, 2025 to 30 there will be peak. Later on we can say that its use is going to reduce. Countries like India, which are the chief consumer of coal, their consumption and dependence on coal is reducing in the energy mix. We know that. Okay. And the amount in the energy mix of renewable energy is increasing every year. So that's why we can say that we are transitioning towards the era where we will end the fossil fuels. Now the next is commitment and affirmation of principle to CBDR, principle of CBDR. Every year the outcome commits to the CBDR principle because the negotiations are based on this principle. So this is good thing that countries are not deviating from the core principles. ठीक है, core principles वही है. For the first time, food security and health has been given attention here. We know that the pandemics like COVID-19 and to some extent there is threat of other pandemics also in future because of climate change. And that's why health sector, food security is also being given, let's say, priority. If you remember this year's mains question, क्या था question? This year's mains question. Impact of climate change on food security of tropical countries. GS1 paper. ऐसा था ना question? Food security. So of course food security is threatened because of climate change, and that's why we need to work on this. And for the first time, let's say, there is a pledge, there is a declaration to protect the food systems, to protect the farmers, and we can say food grain producers. Then on adaptation also there has been several commitments. Urbanization, you can see that River Cities Alliance is there, or we can say that C40 Cities Alliance is there. All these are working towards the green urbanization, clean urban cities, we can say urban spaces. There is active participation of C40, powering past the coal alliance. What is this? It can be asked in the PT. Powering past the coal alliance, it was announced in 2017 COP. Okay, and this is alliance of Canada and UK. It is related to, we can say, ending the use of coal. Ending the use of coal. So it is appealing all the countries in the world to reduce and end the use of coal. That's why powering past the coal. ठीक है? Okay, now moving on. Limitations. Okay, there are limitations, of course. I told you that there is no major outcome as such, and that's why we can emphasize on limitations like loss and damage fund. The interim provision is there that World Bank will be handling all these things, but the least developed countries are concerned about World Bank. Why? The World Bank is dominated by whom? Western countries. Who funds the World Bank? Western countries. Again, the terms and conditions, the conditionalities, aid, ethics in international relations. पढ़ते हैं ना आप वो ethical issues in international aid, GS4. So same thing, because the least developed countries are concerned about the kind of conditionalities they will put. Again, because of those conditionalities, there will not be transfer of fund because these countries may not be having capacities or satisfying those conditions. तो हम ये बोल सकते हैं कि वो एक concern है. Second is, we can say no specific target set, especially related to commitments to reduce the greenhouse gases. अब तो पेरिस डील के बाद ऐसा कुछ लग ही नहीं रहा है कि कोई कमिटमेंट दे सकता है, बाइंडिंग कमिटमेंट्स. All these countries have settled on voluntary contributions. Okay, so this thing, then thereafter we can mention that weak language used in the final draft, like phase down, it is a weak language, although we can say it is agreed by all. So it is a diluted language. Along with that, the other aspects like resistance to green pledges. The countries like India, China have not signed the tripling of renewable energy as a pledge, or global methane pledge we have not signed. There are concerns related to, we can say, methane sector in India. Why? Because India is having largest cattle population. India is also leading producer of rice in the world. Paddy cultivation is prominent in India, and that's why we cannot commit through this global methane pledge. If India cannot, then India is one of the major emitter, so we can say that is problematic. Lack of resources and technology. Yes, the same thing, the finance transfer. So lack of adequate fund transfer and technology transfer from developed countries to developing and underdeveloped countries is one of the challenge towards climate change actions, and it remains. Okay. Voluntary commitments regarding methane, India is not. Then gray areas in loss and damage fund, I told you this small island countries, they are not agreeing with this. So what should be the way forward? Okay, so way forward, one should talk from the keywords. The keywords, climate change is mitigation, adaptation, fund transfers, finance transfer or climate finance we can say, and technology transfer. These are the keywords. Everything should revolve around this. So mitigation measures, right? So mitigation measures, it should require some kind of commitments like NDCs. There should be some binding commitments, targets. You can clearly define targets for both developed and developing countries. Why don't we mention some innovative aspect here? Like we agreed in Kyoto Protocol, there are binding in terms of which countries, developed countries, emerging countries, and we can say developing countries were separated from it. Now at present, the major aspect is related to some of the developing countries like India, China. So why don't we come up with new categorization? New category of developing countries, like large developing countries, India, China. Why don't we have a separate category of these countries and request them to have some binding, we can say, commitments? Okay. So these commitments can be comparatively milder than the developed countries, of course, or emerging countries. तो ऐसा कुछ इनोवेटिव सॉल्यूशन लाना पड़ेगा यहाँ पर, नहीं तो हम लीस्ट डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज के साथ हमें ग्रुप किया जा रहा है. आर वी लीस्ट डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज और स्मॉल आइलैंड नेशंस? नो, right? So then only developed countries will think like, okay, now they are also committing a bit higher than they used to. ठीक है, enhance NDCs. All these countries should, let's say, increase their nationally determined contributions. Every 5 years they are supposed to revise them, and they should be like every 5 years when they are revising, there should be higher commitments, enhanced commitments. Then international cooperation on finance and technological aid, same thing. Just transition with binding commitments. Yes, of course, just transition is related to CBDR principle. Binding commitments on developed countries, largely we can say that, but you should mention some innovative aspect like the kind of collaborations that are happening between government and non-governmental organizations, or we can say that private. Okay, so collaboration between these three, draw like this: public sector, private sector, and we can say non-profit organizations. Third sector, non-governmental organizations. Think tanks, let's say international climate coalitions. Okay, so when they come together and when there is collaboration, there can be technology transfer, and there can be, let's say, more pressure by these non-profit organizations on both government as well as private sector. They cannot work in isolation. Then
checks and balances.
Yes, checks and balances. This new mechanism should be emerging. No, intergovernmental is not going to work. Ultimately, private sector should come in. Nowadays, we are seeing voluntary contributions by the private sector association. So they should be linked with government and non-profit organizations, think tanks. expert bodies. Then capacity building, you can mention capacity building of developing and underdeveloped countries to mitigate the impact of whatever the disasters, natural hazards happening because of climate change. तो उसको हम capacity building बोल सकते हैं. Second aspect of capacity building is to utilize the funds and technology transfers given by the developed countries. Okay, so both aspects are required, capacity building. Third thing you can mention here is the kind of new thing that our Prime Minister has suggested, and that is voluntary actions by the people, common people. It is kind of nudging aspect. ठीक है, voluntary contribution by the people.
What kind of contribution they can do?
Yes, small contribution. Of course, if every person is, let's say, simple, if the person decides to commute through public transport and not taking out the car, at least on alternate day. At least on alternate day. If you are driving alone for longer distances, why don't you use the public transport? It is more efficient also, and it is environment friendly also, like metro. Individual contribution. Why don't we pledge? Why don't we ask the people to pledge for this? Take the commitments from them. Voluntary commitments. It's not like a binding thing, but that will contribute on larger scale. World Cup socho aap. If everyone is showing such kind of commitments, voluntary commitments, it can bring huge change. The best example is Earth Hour. When this movement started, there was like, ये क्या है ऐसे type का? Who will implement this? Earth Hour. Switching off all the electricity and the light for half an hour or 1 hour, no? 1 hour. This was started in Sydney, Australia. And now it is implemented all over the world. And this can, create a kind of huge contribution. If suppose tomorrow such kind of contributions comes on every month, ये तो एक साल में एक बार होता है, once in a year. If we decide that every month for half an hour, all the electricity appliances will be switched off. ठीक है, at least let's say unnecessary things will be switched off, everything. If we all decide like this, then it is going to contribute on larger scale. But innovation चाहिए, उसके लिए एक kind of let's say emotional appeal चाहिए. There should be emotional appeal. Then only it will work. It will change the attitude and behavior of the people. है ना? तो ये एक example हम बोल सकते हैं उसमें. Right? Like in India, we are, let's say, appealing emotionally, attitudinal change के लिए, Swachh Bharat is there, or leaders are coming out and they are, cleaning the public places. What is this? If they can, let's say, request people to do the same, what they did in COVID-19, come out and so bang the thalis and all. ठीक है? So people did na at that time. तो सेम तरीके का ये भी हो सकता है. If let's say leaders they have appeal, noted let's say prominent personalities like sports person होते हैं, actors होते हैं, people follow them. ठीक है, वैसे ही होगा, otherwise बहुत मुश्किल है. ठीक है? Yes, any question?
So far they asked a question regarding the outcome and everything.
Yes.
What I noticed today, is there any possibility that specifically UPSC can ask the private contribution?
Yes, sure. They can ask. Okay. They can ask the present level of contribution by the private sector led initiatives. Okay. So you need to know, let's say many of them are there now. Few years back, there was like 1 or 2 only, right? But now there are many private sector-led initiatives. ठीक है?
To prepare a notes.
Yes, you can work on that separately. ठीक है? Fine then, let us stop. Okay? Just a moment. One question was there. Can we convert coal-powered plant to nuclear one with reactor safety? See,
very costly.
Nuclear is not the problem as such. Okay, safety, when the safety is ensured, there is no problem. But the problem is like the countries like India, where densely populated regions are there, where to set up these plants. Second thing is that how to let's say address the apprehensions of the people. Like we are seeing so many protests, Kudamkulam protest, Jaitapur in Maharashtra, new plant is coming up, so many protests, land acquisition issue is there. So all these concerns needs to be addressed by the government satisfactorily. Then only, and second thing is that only the countries who have technology and fuels for nuclear energy, they are committing this. See, Canada, one of the largest resources. France, they have technology. हमने उनसे लिए हैं reactors, France से. USA, हमने उनसे reactors लिए हैं, nuclear reactors. So they have technology, they have resources, they are committing. India, already there are many problems and we don't have resources. Fossil uranium, we don't have that much resources, we don't have technology also. Develop at that scale. Our 3-stage nuclear program is like first stage pe hi abhi bhi, second stage is like prototype FBR is developed, that's all. We need to reach to third stage. This is very important, thorium based. Then only we have sufficient reserves. World's largest thorium reserves we have in India.
So, but still we are in the second stage. We are not in the second stage actually. We are now only creating the prototype.
Yes.
Do you think that we can reach that?
If government emphasizes on it, no. Government, you can see the present government is not at all paying attention to nuclear energy, hydrogen energy, green hydrogen, or electric vehicles, EVs, or let's say biofuels. इस पे ज़्यादा focus हो रहा है. You can see that, right? If the government emphasizes on this thing or development of technology, indigenous technology, then only it will happen. ठीक है? Fine. Let us stop then. Okay.